All right, let's talk about Alexander the Great. We all know the legend, right? His unstoppable march, his conquest of the known world, especially his campaign in India. But what if one of his most famous victories never actually happened? Or at least not the way we've been told. Today, we're digging into the story you probably haven't heard.
The history books, they tend to paint a really simple picture. Alexander marches east, he fights, he wins, he conquers. Easy. But was his Indian campaign really the stunning success that the Greeks claimed it was? That's the big question we're going to tackle in this explainer.
So to get to the bottom of this, we're going to follow the evidence, kind of like detectives. First up, we'll look at the official story, that unstoppable march and the legendary battle that came with it. Then we're going to dive into a major problem in the historical sources, follow a huge clue his own army left behind, and finally try to figure out what really went down. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really understand the mystery here, you have to appreciate the man and his war machine. By the time Alexander set his sights on India, his reputation was, well, it was almost mythical. He seemed totally invincible. And his push to the east was a masterclass in shock and awe. I mean, get this, he crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains in just 10 days, something that should have been impossible. Then he gets to the Indus River and just builds a fleet on the spot to cross it. His reputation was so huge that rulers were sending him gifts, and the great city of Taxila surrendered without even putting up a fight. It really looked like nothing could stop.
So, this unstoppable march leads us straight to the climax of the whole campaign, and really, the heart of the legend. The massive, epic battle against the Indian king Porus at the river Hydaspes.
And the Greek accounts are just so vivid. They talk about this terrifying opponent, King Porus, and his war elephants, an enemy totally unlike anything the Macedonians had ever seen before. It's always painted as one of Alexander's toughest but also most brilliant victories.
And the legend is really sealed by this one powerful moment. When the supposedly defeated King Porus is captured, Alexander asks him how he wants to be treated, and Porus says, "Treat me as a king." Alexander, so impressed by his enemy's courage, not only agrees, but gives him his kingdom back and even adds more territory. I mean, it's the perfect story, right? A gracious winner, a noble loser. And it's that version that has been told in the West for centuries.
But this is where our investigation takes a really sharp turn. Because while the Greeks were busy writing this epic tale of battle and honor, the Indian historical tradition was writing, well, absolutely nothing.
And this right here is the central problem. On one side, you've got these incredibly detailed Greek accounts of a huge battle, massive Indian losses, and the dramatic capture and honoring of Porus. And on the other side, total silence. Indian sources have no mention of a King Porus and absolutely no mention of this supposedly monumental battle. It's just not there.
Think about that for a second. One of the most famous events in Alexander's entire career, and it has zero independent confirmation from the other side. The whole story is hanging on the word of the guys who claim they won. And that, it raises a pretty big question. What really happened at the Hydaspes?
To even begin to find an answer, we have to look at what happened immediately after the battle. It's an event that's often just a footnote in the story, but it might just be the most important clue we have: the mutiny of Alexander's own army.
Just think about the logic here for a minute. Step 1, your army pulls off a glorious, hard-fought victory. Morale should be through the roof, right? Step 2, they hear about an even bigger enemy up ahead. Step 3, they completely lose their nerve, mutiny out of fear and exhaustion, and force their invincible king to turn back for the first and only time in his career. Does that make sense to you? A victorious army doesn't usually collapse right after a huge win. Something about that story just feels off.
And look, this isn't just modern speculation. Real military historians have looked at this exact sequence of events, a supposed great victory, immediately followed by a mutiny and a retreat, and they've come to a very different conclusion. They suggest that the Greeks may have won a Pyrrhic victory at best, meaning they took such heavy losses it was basically a defeat. Or maybe they actually lost, and the whole thing was just spun as a victory for the history books.
So when you put all these pieces together, the one-sided sources, the very strange mutiny, a very, very different picture of Alexander's time in India starts to come into focus. So let's connect the dots. The story of this epic battle, it's all from Greek sources, with nothing to back it up from Indian records. The army's mutiny makes way more sense if they just got absolutely hammered in a brutal battle, not if they'd won a glorious victory. And the bottom line is pretty clear. Alexander never actually gained political control of India. He was forced to give up and go home.
And if you look at what happened right after he left, it just shows how shaky his whole position was. The retreat begins in 326 BC. Just 3 years later, Alexander's dead in Babylon. His massive empire immediately shatters into pieces, and within about 2 decades, all that territory he fought so hard for in the east is just handed over to the powerful Indian Mauryan Empire.
So if he wasn't really a conqueror of India, what was he? Well, his true, lasting legacy wasn't about military control at all. It was a cultural footprint. The contact between the Greeks and Indians sparked this really unique fusion of art, especially in the Gandhara region. You can actually see Greek or Hellenic styles influencing Buddhist sculpture. It's a fascinating legacy, for sure, but it's a far cry from total conquest.
Which brings us to our final thought here. The story of Alexander and India is this incredible reminder of a simple truth. We always say that history is written by the victors, but this whole episode forces us to ask an even more important question. What happens to the truth when the victors are the only ones left to tell the tale?